Today we'll be kind of looking at mindful communication through the lens of our own presence. I noticed in my own life so much of what I said came from what I needed to defend or uh, opinions, values, and beliefs I had that I thought were important to put into words for much of my life. And while there can definitely be a time for that, the vast majority of our conversation with others and the conversations that we have with ourselves in our mind tend to be driven by our wants and our needs, our dislikes, and a desire to be heard. So today we're going to go into what that desire is about. We're going to also look at what is it like to open up a space of presence in conversation with ourselves and with others. What is it like to bring mindfulness, the awareness of this moment, to the story that we're telling to ourselves and to others? So let's get started with a quick meditation, just to tune in to what that storytelling sense feels like. So if you'd like, you can close your eyes or keep them open and just gaze towards the floor in front of you. Take a few deep breaths and settle into the chair you're sitting in. Bring your attention to the sensation of the feet on the floor. What do the bottoms of the feet feel like? Tops of the feet. What raw sensation do you notice? Now bringing attention to the hands. What are the hands touching? What does that feel like? And now bringing attention to the belly. What's happening in the belly? You notice any tension, holding? What does the navel feel like? Now, see if you can locate where a sense of you is. Most of us have a sense of being some kind of an observer of our experience. Sometimes it can feel like we're riding around in the head, behind the forehead, or the eyes. But there is a thinking sense of us. Or maybe it's closer to the chest or the belly for you. See if you can just sense into where that is for you right now. And can you gently allow it to move towards your heart center, towards the middle of the chest? Can you just see if you can allow that sensation of me to drift down from the head to the throat to the heart center? Or if you were already feeling as if the sense of you was there, can you go into that more deeply? As you sense into the sensations of what it feels like to be you, what do you notice? Is there a tingling, a numbness, a heat, coolness? Did you notice that the awareness wants to drift away from the heart center? Or that maybe it's difficult to even sense into it all? No right, no wrong, just an exploration of what that sense of me feels like in the body, just the sensations. And if it's extremely vague and you hardly notice anything, or if it's overwhelming and you feel like you can't stay with it, just noticing those stories and coming back to the sensations, whatever they are, right now, in this moment. Now bring your attention to whatever story might be happening in thought. Maybe it's, I can't do this, or this feels nice, or I'm hungry. Whatever thoughts are arising, just allow your attention to be with your sense of self and the thoughts. And you experience both at the same time. What's that like? And with the story of the thoughts, Is there a gap between that story and your sense of self? Or maybe it feels like the story is the sense of self. See if you can find a gap between the story arising, the thoughts arising, and the sense of the one the story is arising to or for. Sensing into this gap gives us access to seeing our stories in the present, right here, right now. Not the same as it was the last time, not like it will be the next time, but right now. And this gap also gives us access to listening to the stories of others right now, as it is in this moment, with compassion, gentleness, and curiosity. What's it like to simply listen from this gap? Just listening to the stories of the mind. And if you start to get carried away by a story or thoughts, gently coming back to that heart-centered awareness. Breathing into it and just letting your sense of self settle in the middle of the chest. All right. Wiggle your fingers and toes. When you're ready, open your eyes. Mm. Finding this gap, this awareness that isn't carried away by thought or desire or aversion, where we can simply rest with what is, can bring peace to any story, whether it's a story we're telling ourselves or a story that's being told to us by someone else in communication. And really, mindful communication is all about communicating from the present. So that means noticing that conditioning is here. yes, I have this bias, or have these feelings, or I have these thoughts are arising. But then seeing that from that gap, no one response is necessary or better than any other. And often, no response is even needed. In active listening, we can just maintain this gap, be in the present, and allow the story to unfold. Especially when we're feeling reactive around the stories of others, when people are really pushing our buttons and anger arises, or sadness arises, or the hardest one of all is when we're unjustly accused. Nothing brings the full weight of the mind identified self and that identification with the story that takes us out of the moment and off into the past and the future. And how very dare you, why I'm gonna. But we can also see that in those times, it's really an opportunity for us to come back to this gap, to come back to this sense of the self that is not the story, but is capable of telling the story of this moment, the fullness of this moment, of everything that's here now, which may include some things from the past and some things from the future, but doesn't have to be rooted in our story of who we are. It can be open to the possibility of what's present right now. And this is really one of the biggest benefits I've found in mindfulness is that before I really started practicing mindfulness and found access to this non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, it always felt like I had to think and work and do and manipulate and do it right. And if I do it wrong, then there's so much thinking that happens about just how do I do this? How do I do this conversation? How do I do this job? How do I do this presentation? How do I do this that I'm doing right now? And when we approach these moments with mindfulness, we hear the story of the present as it's arising, and we can tell that authentically. So that includes the feelings and the thoughts, but not so much the preconceived notions of how things have to be. It's an openness, it's a curiosity to what's here. What does this person who's sharing this thing with me need? What need of theirs hasn't been met? How am I reacting to that? What happens when I just take a breath and see if I can get to that gap between the story and the sense of who I am? What happens when my words come from that place of compassion? Because mindfulness, this non judgmental awareness of the present moment, is a deep connection to compassion. That felt sense, that knowing that we are all in this together. And even the most difficult conversations, interactions, conflicts are reframed by that awareness, by that compassion. And it's something we cultivate with our mindfulness practice. So it isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Is this is this a little better than it was? Great. If it's not, then what's not coming together? What doesn't make sense? Gently, curiously, compassionately going into our own experience. So, our challenge over the next couple of weeks is to see if we can bring more mindfulness to our communication, to use the times when we're communicating with others and with ourselves, if there's self talk, are we going to that gap? Are we present with our own sense of self as we're speaking? Or are we conveying a story of the past, of the future, of desire, of aversion? And what's that? What's the difference? Because it's something we can explore on our own. It's not, this isn't about the actual what we do. In the practice of it, it helps for sure. And in this week's challenge, there's some definite pointers to help with mindful communication. But it's really about more about the spirit of it and going deeply into the experience of it, because that's where the the knowing, that non-conceptual knowing of who we are, deepens. And through that deepening of that knowing, the mindful awareness also deepens and becomes like a habit. And we're able to bring that to our communication with ourselves, with others, um, to all the things in our life, to our work, to our play, to our family life, uh, to our community. So I'm curious to hear how your experience of mindfully communicating is, and what you found works, what you have that's challenging. And I think it's a great way to practice mindfulness in out in the world. So I'm excited for to focus on this for the next couple of weeks.